the SEC. They're doing them for conference games. So we have the first one because we have the first SEC conference game this weekend between South Carolina and Kentucky. And here you go. You've got exactly out, doubtful, questionable, probable. Big long list for Kentucky. A lot of out for Kentucky. Chip Trainum, obviously, out. Demi Sumo. I'm gonna have to get this name right eventually. Demi Sumo. I keep wanting to say Demi Sumo Kabong, but that's not it. That would be an awesome nickname for him. Kongbe. Demi Sumo Kongbe will be carrying the load on the ground for the Wildcats, along with probably some Brock Vandegrift. But all right, Ari, you've placed a bet or two in your lifetime. Do we think these are going to make a? Yeah. Do we think these are going to make a difference?
I mean, they're certainly helpful. You know when it would have been really, really helpful, Andy, was during COVID. The era of which half a team could get ruled out 10 minutes before kickoff and nobody had any idea that was going on. That was the hardest season to place a wager. I do think that they will. The thing that I am wondering, and I'm assuming is going to happen soon, is like once a person is questionable, like you can start playing games with that because that word doesn't really give you any information, right? It's like we're not sure if he's going to play. Will he play? Will he not play? We'll figure it out. And it kind of puts you back in the same position, but it is good to see that people are on it, so you have an idea of like, okay, would I still place this bet if this person doesn't go? Or do I really like this because they're probable now? Like, anything that acknowledges injuries in any way, I think is helpful because college football has a long-standing history of gamesmanship. Mm-hmm. And, coaches might know that a player isn't playing or is unavailable on Monday, and you don't hear about it till 10 minutes before kickoff. Like that happened all the time. So this is certainly something that I think is necessary given how big of a business gambling has become in this sport, but also just transparency in general. Like my number one thing with college football, that's always like, you always talk about how crazy, stupid, and funny the sport is. Like the paranoia that exists in these coaches' rooms is just off the charts. I was once doing a story, and I won't tell you who it was or which program it was, but I was at an SEC program doing a recruiting story, and their recruiting coordinator was talking about how they felt like they got their office bugged, and they had to they had debuggers that go through to make sure that there were no listening devices in their office. Like this is the world we live in. Even though 99% of it is imaginary, I do think that like any sort of transparency that can help give fans more information, even if it's not from a gambling standpoint, just to understand where your team is or the best players on your team are, I think is going to be a positive, a net gain for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in the past where you've had a starting quarterback who has been out all week. Teams known he's been out all week, but nobody's allowed to watch practice. Nobody had any clue. He doesn't show up, and the coach's like, "Yeah, he was hurt." Oh well,
yeah.
Like, so
I'm sure there's been a lot of bets lost because of that.
Yeah,
because it wasn't like just small-time players. Like it's like, oh, your best running back hasn't been practicing all week. Now, as beat reporters have gotten better over the years, Andy, it's harder to keep that secret.
Right.
In the information era, if somebody's walking around campus in a walking boot, like that's on Twitter in 30 seconds. But it does happen still, or has happened in the recent past, and this will be better.
So let's talk about this Kentucky-South Carolina game before we get into Texas and Michigan. I do want to talk about Kentucky-South Carolina because this is an intriguing game. South Carolina has won 2 in a row against Kentucky. There has been a lot of back and forth between Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer, maybe not directly, but certainly across one another's bows. Last year, Mark Stoops said something before the game. Shane Beamer produced a video after the game. Mark Stoops probably needs to win this game headed into the Georgia game, but Shane Beamer needs to win this game, Ari, because they went 5-7 last year. So this is very, very intriguing.
Yeah, I do think that Kentucky has reached the peak or the ceiling of what the program could be. And I don't know if that's insulting or not, but being a 10-point favorite against a team, that's as talented as South Carolina in the second week of the season, I think is an indication of like when you just said they need to win. When has Kentucky ever needed to win a game? Like that to me is just a testament of what Mark Stoops has been able to accomplish there. Now, I think that they will win the game, and I think that we always have these seasons where Kentucky comes out and, starts 4 or 5-0, and then they end up playing Georgia. And then you realize the great divide that's probably unovercomable, if that's a word.
Yeah.
That's kind of waiting around the corner here for Kentucky. But I do think that they've got a very, very good team with some really important pieces and one of the best players in college football.
So you and I, when we were together before, I always said that Kentucky's the best job in college football because they will build you a statue if you can win 8 games a year. They will pay you like the other guys in the SEC who are expected to win national championships. And all you have to do is occasionally win 9 or 10 and then just, be reasonably okay every year. I think that's changed. I don't think it's the best job in America anymore because of something Mark Stoops did. I think he's made it not the best job in America by sort of thumbing his nose at the fact that he has the best job in America. By going after the Texas A&M job last year, that probably made it where the first time he has one of these losses where the Kentucky fans are like, oh no, it's going to be 8-4 again. Now they're going to turn on him because before he was the guy who brought them there. He was one of them. He's got a bourbon company. But now they know. He was like, oh, I think I've hit the ceiling here. I'm going to go for this Texas A&M job. The Texas A&M trustees revolted. They're like, no, we're not going to guarantee Mark Stoops the same amount we guarantee Jimbo Fisher. So we're going to go for somebody else. It's unbelievable. Single T in the chat. You sort of ruined the Kentucky job, though. Everybody knows that now. So it's my fault?
What's interesting is we did say that it's the best job in America because of the success to failure ratio and what would happen. And I understand that fan temperament has changed to a certain degree. I agree with what you just said. But I think the real question here is what would have to happen for Kentucky to fire him? Like, I think that fans
nothing. They'd owe him so much.
So what I'm saying, to me, that's why it hasn't changed, because he could exist in Lexington for a very long time, having, below average seasons. And I'm talking 4 or 5 win seasons for Kentucky, which used to be better than the norm, and still be completely fine. I think that when you start getting into tough jobs, it's the ones where you get fired very quickly for results that are probably more in line with where your program is. Like, that's like from best to worst jobs in America. Like, that's why I thought Tennessee was one of the worst jobs in America before, because they anticipated or wanted you to win 10, 11, 12 games in year 2. And where the program was at before Josh Heupel got there, I wasn't necessarily sure that was possible. And talk about the fans and the pressure cooker. Like, that would be the hardest job to me in America, or one of them. It stands out to me. Kentucky, he can go to bed in his beautiful $3 million home in his, goose down situation in his bed and never have to fret about whether or not he's going to have a job when he wakes up in the morning.
Surrounded by bottles from his own distillery. Yes.
And honestly, who cares like what the people in rural Kentucky say from their basement anyway, right? Like, that's
Mark Stoops.
That's a joke, guys. Don't
say that.
I'm joking. Yeah. I'm joking.
Yeah.
But seriously, like, listen, we all know that being a college football coach, getting things thrown in your face from fans or being a topic on Twitter and things that people say is part of the job. On the list of things that would make me change my mind, I think fan sentiment is probably at the bottom of that list. I think that the one thing that I would say that would make me change my mind, and this is a different way to look at it, Andy, is it takes a certain type of person to become comfortable at the ceiling. So, like, Mark Stoops can exist at Kentucky for the next 20 years and go 8-4 and be fine and be a coach that's revered and loved there. But I think that the coach's mentality is competitive. And when you have conquered something, their number one thing that they're told to do, just with their sense and their inherent nature, is to go accomplish something bigger and better. So the Kentucky job would be the best job in the world for somebody who has a temperament that wants to just revel in the ceiling for 20 years, even though the ceiling isn't championships. But I think that Mark Stoops is already proven that he's not that type of person. So from that standpoint, money and security at a place that, you've already achieved everything that you're going to achieve is great. But for the coach's mentality, that's not necessarily, I think, the legacy or the place that they would want to exist for a few more decades. So from that standpoint, I think that like it's so good that it's boring, which makes it not as good. Does that make sense?
Yep. So Single T, who's blaming me for this, by the way. It does feel like in the last 4 years, since you started saying it's the best job, the feeling of 8-4 has changed from being a success to being just okay. They're good being 8-4, but kind of wanting more. I think that's natural for fan bases. I always talk about how South Carolina had that period with Steve Spurrier where they won 11 games 3 years in a row. They beat Clemson 5 years in a row. And that had never happened in the history of the program before. And suddenly people started thinking that was a birthright. And it's not. And so you
and what
do
happens
have to
a lot
kind of
too, Andy, is that, sorry, not to talk over you. I've been doing that a lot. I got to work on it. But he is a coach who has figured out a plan, executed that plan so well that it's gotten to this point. But at the same time, if you look at their schedule this year, they're playing Georgia, they're playing on the road at Ole Miss, they're playing at Florida. Say what you want about that game. They've got a much better Auburn team at home. Then they're at Tennessee, at Texas, and host Louisville. Like what schedule? Like what are we supposed to do with that? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like 8-4 on that schedule with the Kentucky team that he's built, I think is a successful season. So I think every year that changes, but I think that there is a yearning nature. And like Mark Stoops is somebody that I covered when I was in college. He was the defensive coordinator at Arizona back in the 2005 to 9 range. And he was there. I've known him now for 20 years. And I think that he has it in him where he wants to. I think it's the same thing that Brian Kelly experienced at Notre Dame to a more closer extent. Notre Dame made the playoff and was in games against Alabama. But I think Brian Kelly is at LSU because he wanted to win national championships because he realized the ceiling at his program, at least the way he ran it, had already reached it there. So like, I think that Mark Stoops has been existing at Kentucky's ceiling for longer than Brian Kelly was existing at Notre Dame's. And at a certain point, your heart yearns for more.
Yep. I'm looking in the chat and everybody is dead certain that Kentucky's going to win this game. I am not. Like, that is a big number, that 9.5. I am not not sure Kentucky's going to cover or win. So this is a must watch. I'm telling you right now. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.